What's up?
So what is the biggest struggle when tackling a time travel show?
Funny enough, you would have thought that it would. I would have thought that it would have been the sort of twisty labyrinth of rules. It has turned out to be the most logistically challenging show I've ever produced by a mile. Creating an entirely new, historically accurate period every single week is incredibly painful. And so that part's been hard. I look forward to the headline, "Timeless Producer Dies of Stroke on Toilet." But I think the audience is the beneficiary. I think because we're really setting a very high bar of production quality. You know, you can't pull off the kind of cheesy shit you would do in the 80s if you were doing a version of this show. And we're trying to really bring people into a very visceral, dusty reality of what those times were like. And that level of detail takes an incredible amount of effort and a lot of money and a lot of angry phone calls. And so that's been the hardest part by a lot.
How often are we going to see the struggle of changing the past?
I mean, I think it always lives as a danger of the show. You have to be careful with it because you want the reality, you want the present reality that they're fighting for to be the audience's reality. Like, you don't want, T-Rexes with Nazi armbands goose-stepping down Fifth Avenue, for instance, just as an example. It needs to be our world, right? So, but the stress is always there because they can't, basically the way I always put it is, you're fighting a battle in a museum where you can't knock anything over. And that's a really hard battle to fight. And inevitably, you're going to break some shit. And so what do those changes mean? Now, did you guys see the pilot?
Yes.
So the pilot, which now it's aired, so I guess I can spoil it. The pilot is a really good example of that, which is there was a major change, but it was only in one character's life, and it was only behind the closed doors of her house. And that's the best way we're probably going to do reality changes because it's way more painful to your characters, it's way more personal to your characters, and it's not like this big, broad thing where like the headlines of the world are different. Because I don't think we want to do that. I think we're actually trying to do a grounded version of the show. I mean, look, it's the goal is always to be how can we be the modern version of Quantum Leap, and how can we, or the modern version of Back to the Future. Like, we want to be fun and rollicking, but there's a reality to those shows and movies that we want to maintain. So.
No, go ahead.
The show actually walks the line between episodic and serial. It's a very hard line. You have some experience with Supernatural, but how do you still, because this show, Goran's character obviously has to be in every episode.
Yeah.
So the ongoing plot has to be developing. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, luckily it's not easy, but luckily this will sound douchey, and apologies in advance. But I've had a lot of experience with Supernatural. Some would say years of how to balance that, and I'm not the first guy that did it. Obviously, I came up my influences in television were X-Files and Buffy, and as I was learning to do the job, early Smallville, and there are people who are a lot more talented than me who stuck that formula, and Joss and Chris Carter were masters of it, because people forget that Buffy was a procedural, and so there's a term, I think it was the Smallville guys who used the term, I forget who said it, so I apologize for not attributing it, but what we learned is they're called mythalones. and that you can almost break it down mathematically. It's almost an 80-20 split, and there's a formula to it. There really is, which is you come up with your self-enclosed story, and then you say, okay, guys, but we have to advance the serialization. So what detail, what conversation, what little widget can we drop in to reward the recurring viewer? And then honestly, you can set your clock to it, every 4th or 5th episode, then there's a big mythology episode. So you end up with, 3 to 4 big mythology episodes a year that become events. And so there's a format that works. And so we honed it in Supernatural. I got got a lot of experience about how to do it and how not to do it. But again, I'd say that Joss and Chris Carter were the guys who invented it, and I'm just cruising in their wake.
And how deep does the rabbit hole go with specifically with time travel? And you're going to get a lot of fans, of course, who are those super nerds like present company.
Look. Here's my feeling, which is we want the show to be fun. Back to the Future and Quantum Leap were fun. And those were the ones that I loved. And look, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not that interested in doing like a mindfucky time travel show. I'm interested in having kind of like a rollicking adventure. But the thing is, and this is speaking as a genre fan, I'm one of these guys, and I think my work shows. Like, I come at this as a nerd and a fan. I don't, more than anything. And to me, like, sci-fi is not about the gadgets. Sci-fi is about the what if. That's why we're all in. And those are universal and emotional. And whether you're a sci-fi nerd like I am or not at all, good sci-fi is about that. What if you were in the booth what if you were in the balcony when Lincoln got shot? What would you do? What if you could change a tragedy in your life? What if monsters were real? And that to me is the sweet spot of what I try to do. And so what I hope for is, yes, I'm making science fiction, but by design it's meant to be accessible and universal and emotional and with a lot of heart, because that's what I think, that's what Spielberg does, that's what Zemeckis does. I just grew up just, idolizing them and trying to, I've really spent the majority of my life just trying to process E.T. and Star Wars in my work. And those are, that stuff is not about the guns and the gadgets, it's about the people. And that's what we're trying to do.
So it's rare to see a time travel story that actually takes prejudice and how that is affecting people throughout history into effect. And Malcolm was telling us earlier that he had a lot of input in some of those lines about, being in the back of the bus and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Can you tell me a little more about what went into, making that a part of the show and how much input you get from the actors in that?
Yeah, when Sean and I were trying to decide like who the characters were, we had this idea that like, okay, if we're going to go back into history, we want to show people angles of history they've never seen before. And part of that was by very conscious design. Out of the 3 travelers, we said we should make one female and we should make one African American, because so much of history is the history of rich white dudes, but there was all these other different worlds that were happening at the same time that to us would be fascinating to explore. What was it like to be a black man during those times? What was it like to be a woman during those times? And, spoiler alert, like not easy at all. And so for us, here's the thing. I am like a half step away from just being a carny. I'm just I'm a guy who makes a sci-fi show. Like, I'm not trying to make a message or be overly earnest. I just want to entertain people. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to present an honest, version of history. And an honest version of history and how we play it is we want to, without like trying to shine a light on it or having it be a message, we want to say, look, if you're a black man walking around in 1937 New Jersey, there's going to be an honest reality to what that is, and we want to play the honesty, and we just don't want to sugarcoat it. In terms of the actors' input, I mean, absolutely, we ask for their input, and a lot of that has just as much to do with we're really, one, they all have their unique experiences, and we're really blessed that they're just really smart, nuanced, interesting people. And so, yes, the truth is, Sean and I wrote a version of that rant in the jail cell. And it was good. I'd say it was a solid B. It was good. And Malcolm, God bless him, was doing the speech. And then we were at Video Village watching, and I was like, what do you think? And he's like, it's good. And Sean was like, it's good. And I'm like, yeah. So I went over, we did like 2 takes of it, and I went over to Malcolm, and I'm like, okay, you give a speech. And he's like, you don't care what I say? I'm like, don't give a shit. You give a speech. And that was the speech that was the speech that made it into the episode. So, we really are very conscious, both in the writer's room and with our actors, about bringing in people from different walks of life and different backgrounds, and we celebrate them bringing their experiences, their unique experiences to the table, and I think that's a perfect example of that.